The morning she called to ask if I'd tried the chocolates, I was sitting in my kitchen in Westborough, watching the frost crawl across the glass of the window. Her voice had that careful quality, too steady, too polite, like someone reading from a script they'd rehearsed too many times in a quiet room. "Did you enjoy them, Gerald? The ones I left on the porch?" I paused just long enough to make her wait, the way I used to do with corporate executives when I found a discrepancy in their offshore accounts. I wanted to hear her breath catch. "Oh, those," I said, keeping my voice level, the professional mask firmly in place. "I gave them to my accountant, Patricia. She brought them home for her grandkids, said they loved every piece." There was silence on the other end of the line. 3 full seconds of dead air. Then she spoke, her voice rising an octave, cracking the veneer of her composure. "You what, Gerald? Those were expensive. I ordered them specially for you." "That's very kind of you," I replied, staring at the unopened box still sitting on my counter. "Margaret will be touched when I tell her how much they cost." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat by the window and watched the snow come down over the backyard, the same yard where my son used to build forts every February, where my wife Diane used to plant marigolds, where 41 years of this family had quietly taken root. The chocolates were sitting on my kitchen counter, unopened, exactly where I'd left them. I hadn't given them to anyone. But the panic in her voice told me everything I needed to know. I knew then that the audit of my own life had become a criminal investigation. Let me take you back to where this really started, because it didn't begin with chocolates. It began the way most quiet disasters do, with something small that didn't quite add up. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a forensic accountant with a top-tier firm in Ottawa before I retired, and before that, I did 2 years of financial crimes consulting with the RCMP. I know what fraud smells like. I know how people hide money, how they forge documents, and how they rewrite histories to suit what they want. I spent a career learning to see the small things that don't fit, the anomalous entries in a ledger that scream to be noticed. My wife Diane passed away 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 18 months from diagnosis to the end. She was the warmest person I have ever known, a woman who remembered everyone's birthday and kept a notebook of her grandchildren's favorite foods. When she died, she took a particular kind of light out of this house. My son Colin is 41. He lives 20 minutes away in Kanata with his wife Renata and their daughter Sophie, who is 8 years old and the most important person in my life. Sophie has Diane's eyes, that particular shade of grey-green I used to call November Lake. When she comes to visit, she always brings something for what she calls our museum, which is a shelf in my study, where we keep her finds next to Diane's old reading glasses and a photograph of the 4 of us at Sandbanks Provincial Park. Colin is a good man, steady and reliable, but he carries his grief about his mother quietly. Renata is a different matter. When Colin first brought her home 8 years ago, I tried to be welcoming. She is from a wealthy family in Calgary, and she came into our family with a particular set of assumptions about how things should be done. She expected a certain kind of deference that our family wasn't built around. After Diane died, something shifted. Renata started joining Colin on visits more often, but the nature of the visits changed. She began asking questions about the house, casual questions designed to sound like conversation, but were actually reconnaissance. "Have you thought about downsizing, Gerald? This place must be a lot to maintain. My cousin works in real estate. Properties in Westborough have really gone up, haven't they?" I answered her pleasantly and changed the subject every time, but my internal ledger was already marking her down as a risk. Then, about 2 years ago, she started coming alone. Colin travels occasionally for work as a project manager, and during those trips, Renata began stopping by, ostensibly to check on me. I noticed gradually that she always found reasons to be in my study. A book she was curious about, a photo she wanted to show Sophie. I keep my important papers in a fireproof lockbox in the study closet, and I'm precise about how I leave my filing cabinet. I noticed after her third or fourth visit that the cabinet drawer was not quite closed the way I leave it. I didn't say anything. I just started paying closer attention. The chocolates appeared on a Tuesday in March on my 67th birthday. A beautiful box, dark ribbon, the name of a boutique shop in the glebe printed on the side. Renata had left them on the porch with a card. Something made me not open them. It was a feeling, the accumulated weight of small things that hadn't sat right. The questions about the house, the visits to the study, the way her warmth toward me had increased in direct proportion to my growing financial independence. I put the chocolates in a bag and drove them to my accountant's office. Patricia is one of the sharpest people I know. I asked her to have them tested quietly. 3 days later she phoned me. Gerald, the lab, found aconitine. It was injected into 3 of the pieces. Aconitine, derived from monkshood, causes cardiac arrhythmia. In someone my age with mild hypertension, it would look like a heart attack. Enough was found to be fatal. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in my kitchen for a long time. I didn't call the police immediately. I knew that without airtight documentation, an investigation could go sideways. I needed a pattern. If she wanted me gone, she needed to gain something, and that meant there was something on paper. I called my lawyer, Douglas Firth. I asked him to pull my will. He called back the next morning, sounding shaken. "Gerald, when did you update your will?" "I haven't touched it since 2019, I said. "That's what I thought," he replied, "because I'm looking at a document dated last October that significantly changes your beneficiary structure. It moves the primary inheritance away from a trust for Sophie and toward Colin directly, with a clause that in the event of Colin's incapacity or death, everything passes to his spouse. That's not my signature," I told him. I drove to his office and saw the forgery. It was professional quality, using a notarized signature from a service in Gatineau. The date was October 14th. I had an alibi. I had been in Montreal at a conference that day. I had hotel receipts and a photograph from a dinner that put me 180 kilometers away. Renata had been building this methodically. She had access to my study and my old signatures. What she hadn't counted on was that I spent 30 years catching exactly this kind of thing. I think about Sophie often in all of this. Renata had been working on her too, pulling her away from me, telling her that our museum was babyish. I made a decision then to protect that bond above all else. The conversation with Colin was the hardest part. I drove to his house on a Saturday morning when Renata was out. I put the folder in front of him. The forged will, the lab report, the financial audit that showed small, irregular transfers she'd been making from a joint account into a numbered company. Colin didn't speak for a long time. The devastation on his face was something I'll never forget. He was being used as much as I was. He was a conduit for her greed, not a conspirator. I told him I needed his full cooperation with the police. The investigation moved quickly after that. The numbered company traced back to a name connected to Renata. The Gatineau Notary Service cooperated to save themselves. A witness at the chocolate shop remembered Renata returning with the box 2 days after buying it. She was arrested in June. Colin had moved Sophie to his sister's place the night before to spare her the sight of the handcuffs. The legal proceedings lasted 8 months. Renata's defense was a series of desperate lies that collapsed under the weight of the paper trail I had meticulously preserved. She was convicted of attempted murder, fraud, and forgery. Colin filed for divorce before the trial even ended. He is a man of resolve, much like his mother was. Sophie is doing well now, seeing a counselor and spending every weekend with me. Last month she brought 3 new items for our museum. A piece of green sea glass, a brass button, and a note that said, "For Grandpa, our museum forever." I put it in the center of the shelf. It is February now, and I've had time to process the betrayal. Renata wasn't a monster in the cinematic sense. She was a person who viewed people as obstacles to be negotiated. She miscalculated the consequences because she believed careful people could be fooled. But I have been careful my entire life. Paying attention is a form of love, and it is also a form of defense. I'm still here, and that isn't a small thing. To anyone watching this who feels that same sense of unease with someone close to them, you are not paranoid for paying attention. Your instincts are data. Elder financial abuse thrives on shame and silence, so do not go quiet. Talk to your lawyer. Talk to your accountant. Protect what you've built. Not for the money, but for the people like Sophie who need you to still be there, watching the snow fall and putting the kettle on. Trust slowly, verify always, and keep your records. It is the only way to ensure the ledger of your life remains balanced.